The evidence heard by this inquiry is unequivocal, overwhelming, and devastating in its clarity. Organised networks of Muslim men systematically raped, trafficked, drugged, impregnated, and destroyed the lives of thousands upon thousands of British children across every region of the United Kingdom for decades. When the documented patterns from Rotherham, Telford, Rochdale, Oxford, Newcastle, Oldham, Huddersfield, Peterborough, Burnley, Tameside, and dozens of other towns and cities are extrapolated nationally, the scale reaches at least 250,000 victims. This is not a collection of isolated local scandals. It is a national scandal of industrial scale child rape and modern-day slavery, enabled, protected and prolonged by the deliberate failures of the British state at every single level. The testimony of the survivors and their families leaves no room for denial or equivocation. Sally watched her daughter's life unravel. Although her daughter had admitted to lying on occasion, the police privately acknowledged grooming, yet in public communications treated her as only a liar. Marlon had his parental authority stripped away so his daughter could be returned to the very place where she had been raped. Whitney's reports of exploitation were dismissed while her own childhood trauma was used to undermine her credibility as a mother. Rachel saw her 12-year-old autistic daughter discouraged from pursuing justice, bullied relentlessly and ultimately driven to her death by an overdose after authorities failed her at every turn. Fiona, Michelle, Chloe, Marie, Grace, Kate, Anna, Jen, Leanne, Taylor, Jane, Lily, and so many others described the same relentless pattern: repeated rape, gang rape, blackmail with filmed abuse, pregnancies used as weapons of control, miscarriages, coerced abortions, and the birth of children who entered the world who had already been condemned to the same cycle. These were not all vulnerable children in the narrow sense the authorities preferred to believe. Some came from stable homes, middle-class families and loving parents. The perpetrators targeted them precisely because they were unguarded by the collective male protection that some minority communities could mobilize. The gangs operated under an honour and shame-based clan code that treated non-Muslims, especially white working-class girls, as property available for sexual abuse. They transported victims between towns, shared them among brothers and friends, forced conversions to Islam, followed by unregistered religious marriages, and justified the abuse by describing the girls as easy meat, white trash, or morally inferior. The same networks targeted Sikh girls until Sikh communities responded with collective male protection. White girls received no such defence. Every institution that existed to protect children instead enabled the gangs. Police forces across England and Scotland discouraged reporting, criminalised victims, destroyed evidence, and allowed known rapists to walk free on bail, and in some cases actively participated or shielded the networks. Social care removed parental authority, placed children in trafficking hubs inside children's homes and semi-independent units, closed cases despite clear evidence of exploitation, destroyed records and retaliated against whistleblowers. The NHS recorded genital injuries, multiple STIs in 13-year-olds, pregnancies caused by rape and suicide attempts, yet discharged the children back to their abusers the same night with no safeguarding or trauma care. Schools watched older men collect girls at the gates, heard disclosures of rape in the toilets, and excluded the victims rather than protecting them. Taxi licensing authorities renewed permits for the very drivers who formed the logistical backbone of the trafficking networks, and collapsed in the face of organised protests when basic safety measures were proposed. The media self-censored the ethnic and religious pattern for fear of being labelled racist. Social media platforms became the primary tools for initial grooming, distribution of rape videos, and coordination between perpetrators. Politics, especially the Labour Party, bears the heaviest responsibility. Councillors and MPs sat on the very authorities that covered up the abuse. They were briefed as early as 2003 through the CROP multi-agency group, yet later denied knowledge. When finally forced to act, the Labour government produced a national inquiry whose terms of reference are so tightly drawn, limited to group-based child sexual exploitation in a handful of relevant local areas, time-limited and deliberately excluding any systematic examination of the demographic, cultural and religious drivers, that it cannot possibly confront the truths that this inquiry has heard. Labour did not merely fail to protect against children. It actively obstructed justice, suppressed ethnicity data, voted against a proper national inquiry, and sacrificed tens of thousands of white working-class girls on the altar of multiculturalism and electoral arithmetic. The Conservative Party, while in national government from 2010 onwards, also failed. It did not impose mandatory ethnicity recording, nor did it launch a nationwide statutory inquiry despite the Rotherham J report and other revelations. Rory Stewart, a former Conservative minister, publicly described the issue as a small problem confined to the north of England. He downplayed the national reality and thus showed the attitude of, at the very least, a section of the party. Scottish politics mirrored the same reluctance, refusing a dedicated inquiry and failing to record the offender ethnicity. The human cost is incalculable and permanent. Survivors carry lifelong PTSD, complex trauma, addiction, chronic physical pain, interrupted education, criminal records, lost children, and unrelenting fear. Many have attempted suicide repeatedly, and some succeeded. Others lost their own children to the same failing system that failed them. The gangs used pregnancy as a deliberate weapon of control, and the state compounded the harm by removing babies for adoption or placing them in care while abandoning the young mothers in the environments where the abuse continued. Intergenerational trauma has been institutionalized. The state recorded the injuries, the STIs, the pregnancies, and the disclosures, yet chose votes, so-called community relations, and fear of racism accusations over the protection of British children. Whistleblowers who try to expose the truth, such as a social worker, Cavan Vines, Tommy Robinson, and countless protective parents, were suspended, bankrupted, subjected to dawn raids, asset freezing, and gagging orders. The rule of law failed, and racial and religious aggravation was almost never applied to the few that were convicted. Foreign national offenders were rarely deported, and sentences bore no relation to the lifetime of destruction inflicted. This inquiry has heard the testimony, it has seen the documents, it has recorded the names of the officers, social workers, counsellors, ministers, and the institutions that failed. The evidence is now overwhelming and irrefutable. The rape gangs did not operate in the shadows, but in the active or passive consent of the British state. The betrayal was total.